And we are live. Hey, Pat.
Hey Dan, how's it
Hey,
going?
it's good. It's been a long time. Hey, community. It's good to see everybody. How long has it been, Pat? It's been like
Mm,
4 to 6 weeks.
has it been that long? I can't. It's well, okay. It's been somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks. I'll give you that.
I'm gonna say, yeah, maybe four. Maybe somebody knows. They can tell us. Hey, Heidi. Hey, Ian. We'll see you in a moment. Hey, Allison. Yeah, Pat. Look, do you see what this means?
It means fall's in the air. I
That's
was,
right.
I just rolled into the office about an hour ago, and it was 42 degrees on my walk over.
Yep, that's
It's
what
re
happens. So
it's getting real.
it's real. So I mean, those of us. Well, Ian can respect it. Those of us who don't have as much, as much hair have to do,
Have to
take care of
make,
our heads.
got
Well,
to
have to make
make
make do.
make the necessary adjustments.
So, well, good to see everybody. We are happy to be back, and we have uh, all two incredible friends and great guests today. We have Melissa Arronte from Medallia, and we have Ian Cook from Visier. So this will be a fun conversation, and I'm going to set that conversation up in a moment, and we'll bring them on as soon as possible because I know we will use the full hour. But hey, Melissa, um, we are excited too. So, Pat, I thought we could just dive in. We've talked about the hat, we've talked about fall, but there's a lot going on. So I just want to jump right in. And I was prior to in preparation for today. I mean, we have kind of we're in a situation where we know with the Great Resignation, with quick quits, there are millions of jobs, but a shortage of workers, right? And I feel like we're kind of, this is a repeat performance. We say this over and over again, but it's continuing to, even the gap is even getting wider and wider. So even in the last month, we've had about 4.3 million people who are just leaving the workforce, actually quitting. So these aren't even people who are deciding not to come back, or these are people who were recently working and leaving. So, there are kind of three thoughts that I have. Number one, we know supply chain distributions and global labor shortages are, this is a big problem. So this is affecting business. This is disrupting things clearly. We know larger societal shifts are taking place, and this is certainly more pronounced in the labor market. But I think the most important thing, and this is what I want to chat about, Pat, is we know many older workers are leaving the workforce and leaving it, and maybe the who were planning to work a little bit longer, but early retirement is a thing, right? 401ks have been doing well, so early retirement's becoming more of an option. Number one. Number two, during the pandemic, there was time to reflect. There was time to really think about what's important. And number three, and we're going to talk about this a lot today, is people are not feeling valued at work and not feeling as connected as they need to be or they should be to really want to show up. So organizations that are suggesting you need to come back to the office. We're not going to support a hybrid workforce. We're not going to promote a people first strategy. This is the stuff, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, around change that is necessary to start to get out of this hole that we've gotten ourselves into. So, Pat, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? You and I talk about this all the time. Um, Love to turn the mic to you for a moment.
Yeah, and I like the way you framed it up, Dan. And in terms of those 3 points, I mean, point number one around early retirements based on 401k performance, et cetera. I'm sure that's something, but it's not really worth commenting too much on that. And I mean, that just sort of makes sense. But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think, points two and three to me are kind of related, and something I was thinking about. I actually read a piece this morning that someone wrote in a sort of talking, kind of a different way to frame up like what's happening, what's behind this great resignation, this exodus, and the point of it was sort of first is that it's definitely true to say that we've all been through a kind of a collective trauma together. You know what I mean? Like as a world. So then what do you do with that experience, and how does that manifest? And there's all those sort of supply chain and supply demand labor kind of pieces, and that just sort of is the result of starts and stops and craziness. And again, we can't really control that, but I do think something where it starts to get into our frame of understanding and providing advisory and ideas is around this idea that, one is, I think people in many ways aren't just running away from something, so to speak, that's driving the great resignation. They're moving to something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They're moving to something that means more to them. They're moving to a job that perhaps gives them, better experiences. They're moving, or they're moving to perhaps a place that connects more with their sense of purpose. So those points 2 and 3 start to make sense. And I think that trauma of like the experience of the pandemic, people are we're starting to see the kind of manifestation of how people have processed this and what they're doing. And I think, there's a lot of different factors to this, but I think that's what's behind it. You know what I mean? So people are intentionally saying, you know what, I'm going to move to this thing because that thing is going to connect more to what's important to me and what I've learned over the last 18 months. And it's not always I'm running from what I don't like. That might be part of it, but I think it's more some of this might be I'm moving to something that brings me more value, or brings me something more meaningful. And we can kind of work as we get into the conversation with, Melissa, we'll talk a little bit about, how to start kind of organize this and understand it, your organization. But I think it's a way to sort of think about it and frame it. And it's a little bit more of it seems less of a fear response that we're or knee jerk kind of reaction we're supposed to have to this versus, people have a clear idea of what's important to them. So what do we do with that?
Yeah. I think that's so true, and which is why there's even it's so important for organizations to clearly articulate what they stand for, right? Because if you're going through, Pat, individually that process, and especially during the pandemic, we all went through a reflection moment, thinking about what's important to me. Again, I love the way you said that. We're actually moving towards something else, not necessarily running away from something. But if you have a clear understanding of what you might be running away from, maybe you won't run so fast, right?
True.
And so
It's
the
that grass is greener
opportunity,
thing.
yeah, the grass is greener thing. So organizations, again, that didn't double down on here's what we stand for, purpose, these are our values, and really promoted the safety of people during the pandemic, the well-being, the mental health of their workers, who really took care of their people. Again, if you weren't doing that during the pandemic, many organizations were. I have so many great stories I could tell there, but some weren't. And I think, unfortunately, if we're not taking care of our people, asking how they're feeling, asking what we can do for them, building that relationship, that that connection that we talk about so often, I think that's there's long-term impact from that period. And Pat, I don't want to dive too much into vaccines and vaccine mandates, but I do want to. That's a whole nother conversation that we could all have. But I do want to say this: this is real, and this is will continue to cause a lot of stress within organizations and workers. Any way you slice it, whatever your opinion might be. There is a responsibility that organizations have to make sure their people are safe. There is also a responsibility to do everything we can to align individual values to organizational values. These things right now, can be perfectly in alignment, and they can also
there could be dissonance. Yeah.
And how do we manage through that? And again, that's a conversation probably all by itself, but I feel like when we're talking about what's happening, we have to bring that up because it's very real. It's top of mind for many, many people.
Yeah, exactly. And I just saw, Ian just chimed in there with the idea of connection. And I do think that's part of the solution or approach to what you just described, which is in the end, what are the things we're doing now as the leaders of organizations with intention to find a way to, we keep saying, map together that who we are as an organization, what's our purpose, what's our values, why are we in this world, and how do we continue to build an affinity between every single worker or person at that organization where they feel that connection.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
when we talk about choose change, that's our kind of rallying cry. That's what we're talking about, And when you talked about, I mean, organizations have done just remarkable work responding to the
Yes.
crisis, but now we've got to kind of we have to take a proactive approach toward realizing things aren't going to change. They aren't going to go back to where they were. It's going to be sort of a change mindset as we move forward. So you've got to embrace this idea of change. And then with this, you've got to evolve your strategy approach. You've got to evolve your science. You've got to evolve your design work so that you're not in that back foot, but you're on that front foot with a strategy that works and a way for you to kind of continue to kind of understand, get answers to those questions, and evolve your organization effectively moving forward. And this is the time.
Well, it is, and so that's a perfect segue. And I'll just kind of before we'll bring Ian and Melissa on in a momentarily here. I think that is our rally cry. As many of you who have heard you and I speak before, Pat, we say if we let this experience in this time, this pandemic, these times go to waste, if we don't act now, I mean, and I've said it many times, it's shame on us. It's insanity to me if organizations try to go back to how things were and actually don't reevaluate, rethink, and actually put in some real fundamental change. And we know that starts with taking care of their people, listening to their people, listening to what the data says, and making bold decisions and bold moves. And so, we're going to talk about this today, but we believe this is HR's time. And we're going to go as far as to say this is HR's last chance. And we're going further and to say that organizations who don't make and really focus on change, it's a losing proposition. You have to think about that long play. So, sorry, I needed to get on my passionate soapbox for a moment, but this is what we'll talk about today. So with that, I am going to bring Melissa and Ian on. Okay. All right, so they are both coming on. So again, Ian, we'll have them do brief introductions, but is a VP of People Analytics at Visier, and Melissa runs the EX practice at Medallia. And there they are. Look at that. The tech
Magic.
works so beautifully. Magic. Hey, everybody.
Hey, Dan.
Hello.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
Let's have you say something again, Melissa, and see if we...
I'm worried about it.
Do you have it sounds like there's two microphones, or...
Do you have, there, looks like you've just muted. Do you have something else open in the browser? I've seen this happen before, where if you possibly have Zoom open, it will actually have two mics. Well, while you're looking at that, Ian, tell us who you are. I mean, for those who don't know you, but...
Nope. Happy to do that, Dan. Spent my life looking at the people side of business, trying to understand how do you create the kind of business where the business thrives through people thriving, and trying to bring leaders to that understanding, which is where I journeyed into the whole data question. That it's a language that business leaders understand. So how do we use data to find the win-wins when it comes to people in business? I currently work for Visier, been there about 10 years, building out, first of all, the products, and now really helping to shape the strategy for the business and engage people in what does this people analytics thing mean? Like, how do we actually put it into practice? And how do we use it to drive change where we have a lot of alignment around how we think about that? So looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Good to see you as always. And Melissa, we're hopeful. Let's hear something.
How do I sound now?
Perfect.
Thumbs up. Perfect. Look at that. See?
Awesome. All right.
Technology's
Thank
on our
you.
side today.
Yes. Thank you so much. Excited to be here with all of you. Melissa Arronte from Medallia. I've been with Medallia just over 2 years now. And prior to joining Medallia, I was actually a customer. I'd been head of people analytics at Liberty Mutual Insurance and then Citizens Bank. So at Medallia, I lead the employee experience practice. And for us, that really means activating the untapped power of your people to improve every area of your business. So we think that is perfectly aligned with Choose Change. We think it's really a different way of not just listening to employees, but understanding them and bringing them to be a part of taking action, being a part of creating the environment in which they work. And so really excited to talk about this topic with you.
That's good. Well, we love having you both here. So I'm just going to start and just ask you both to comment on this. So, we've together really adopted this Choose Change mantra, this call to action, and this is HR's last chance. And we believe change is necessary. And right before you came on, as I was stating, if we don't have a change mindset, if we're not thinking about really reevaluating things, I think our collective opinion is it's probably a mistake, right? So what does Choose Change mean to you, and why now? And ultimately, how are we going to be successful with this? What do we mean when we say Choose Change, HR's last chance? And Melissa, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. To me, Choose Change really means thinking about like the traditional approach we've been taking to employee listening, employee understanding for decades. I mean, both Ian and I were doing that kind of work 20 years ago. He's much younger than I am, so he was doing it in preschool. Right. And we learned a lot from it, right? The annual engagement survey brought such strategic value, but it's not the only way that we can listen and understand our employees. So when I think of Choose Change, I think about what are those traditional beliefs we have about listening to and understanding employees that we can let go of and accept something new. So let me pick an example. For example, response rates, right? When we ran the annual engagement survey, we worked really hard to get a high response rate. I mean, really high, right? 75, 85, 90% response rate, right? We thought it was really important that we heard from every employee. Unfortunately, driving the response rate that high was forcing people who didn't want to respond and actually drove our scores down a little bit. But, there are other reasons why it's not great to be driving that response rate. But if we opened up to something like continuous listening, we're not going to get 90%, 75%, not even 50% of the population responding all the time because there's so much going on. So I say, can we drop the idea that we need such a large response rate, and can we have something just healthy, 20, 25%, right? If a number of people raise an issue, don't we expect that others have that same issue and it's worth looking into it and working on it? We don't need to hear from such a huge portion of the population to know that it's an issue. Right? Another belief might be that HR has to analyze the data, all the feedback before we can give it to managers. And then it takes a long time. We empower managers to lead businesses, to hire and fire, right? To manage huge budgets. I'm sure they can handle this feedback and treat it in the way that we're expecting. It's about problem solving. A survey is about starting a dialogue, raising issues, and together with your team, solving problems and moving forward quickly, right? Part of the benefit is getting ideas from employees and proactively taking action. So just a couple examples. That's what it means to me, Choose Change, dropping traditional ideas and adopting new ones that let us move forward.
Yeah, I love that. And just to add one thought, Melissa, I mean, when you talk about response rates, we grew up in the survey business too. There was such an obsession with that, especially during the annual survey, versus rethinking about meeting the worker, the employee, where they are at the moment when they want to need to give feedback about something that's happened, right? Then it's actually much more helpful than just sort of, you must respond, because if we don't hit 90%, we're not going to get, if anybody's linking engagement survey participation to bonus, please stop, My mic drop stop. I hope I'm not offending anybody that might be. But I mean, we saw that was relatively common. Is that obsession that we have to have a response rate. We have to hear from everybody, regardless if someone really has something to say. So, and I love the work that Medallia does. It's really meeting the moment, meeting the employee where they are at the time when they need to and want to give feedback. So
Yeah,
it's
we had
so important.
just to quickly add to that. I'm thinking, as you were talking about that, Melissa, I was thinking back maybe 10 years ago. I had a client, maybe it was a couple thousand employees, and they were just obsessed with response rate. And I think one year we got them up to 97%. I mean, it was just crazy. I mean, and they was just like you said, rallying cry, we did it. And their scores were terrible. They had so many issues, they had so many problems, and it was, it was like, it just didn't make any sense to me. Like, what are we? It's not a contest,
Right.
Right. So it's the wrong way to frame it, and it is about getting that, like you said, that the right kind of information, that continuous stream of insights, and also evolving those, which we'll probably get to in a few minutes too, evolving those constructs too, to really think about how are we understanding that sense of connection and things. And I imagine Ian will probably add to that a little bit.
Yeah. For sure.
So Ian, yes.
I'm smiling at this whole, doubling down on response rates. Like, what do you expect to hear if you force somebody to do something? Like, why are they going to give you genuine feedback? Like, and it kind of builds into what does choose change mean for me? I was on a call earlier today where the finance perspective of the business was being really, really hammered. I was like, oh, working remote is great. Like, there's all these cost savings, all this money back in the bank, and that's really great because that's building its margin. I was like, so have you thought at all about how that's going to affect retention, how that's going to affect innovation, how that's going to affect the sense of belonging and sense of kind of energy inside your business? And the other side of the conversation, we're like, oh, but it's money. It's like, but it's not money. It's money in one person's world, and it's money somewhere else that the business can't see. So choose change at the top level for me is understand that a business is people and money, and that we need to move away from just making decisions based on the money and making the decisions based on what does this mean for people. Because and again, like kind of the conversations we've had is like that. I think half the companies want the world to go back to what it was. They saw the pandemic as a pause, not as a shift. And I was talking to a new member of my data science team, fantastic woman, like so enlivened by the possibilities of people, and she explained the trend like an earthquake. It's like we've been on these sort of slow buildup of pressure of how people fit with work, and the pandemic actually just caused the pop, like that moment where the quake happens, which I thought was a great image, that she came up with. So choose changes, recognize that we've gone through this radically different shift, and that going back to the cubicle farm is what nobody wants. But people do want to work, and they want to do good work. And if we bring people and money together, business is going to be great. We have to use tools and thinking to do it. But I mean, choose changes. Do not fall back into old habits, because that would be such a disservice to what we've all experienced, is really what it means to me.
Yeah. Well, especially, Ian, I think if we sort of recognize, like we talked about at the head of this conversation, that there is literally a revolution going on right now in terms of, I love that imagery of the fault breaking, because people's sense of work, broadly speaking, has just changed. Like our as we think about our lives and our career, it has just changed, in aggregate. So whatever we did in the past, we just can't continue to do in the future. We have to evolve our thinking and our approaches and our strategy to really understand that. So, science has to evolve, our strategies need to evolve, the way we listen needs to evolve. I mean, we're just like kind of just at the beginning of just a sort of a whole new approach to really truly understanding what's happening with individuals and truly understanding how they're connecting with an organization at any given moment.
Yeah.
I love how you say it has to evolve. We have such an opportunity to rethink things, right? So just the simple example with the response rate, right? We can also think about like timing of surveys. We used to think needed to be annual or quarterly or monthly, but we actually have data now that shows us that people who are leaders in employee experience excellence, and this is some research we just published last week from the Medallia Institute, survey timely. Like you had just said, Patrick, they survey when employees want to provide feedback. That's anytime. It's not on your anniversary. It's not at
Right.
the end or the beginning of a quarter or right after bonus payment, though you do get higher scores when you survey after bonus payment.
Yeah.
If it's a good year. If it's a bad year, move it. Right? But if you just allow employees to provide feedback in the moment that matters to them, instead the engagement survey can come right after vacation when you're too busy, or when your manager just changed, or when you just got a bad performance review. There's so much else going on. Give you the opportunity to provide feedback anytime. It's really evolved to think about things differently, the way things are changing.
I think I really like what you're suggesting or illuminating, Melissa, because it's this notion of going from transactional to people centric. Like, I would see the survey world that we've talked about was very much this command and control transactional world. Like, we have to make a survey work. We have to send it to everybody on this date. They have to complete it by X time. Whereas if I'm a person, I have an emotional reaction to, the vaccine policy that's just been announced, the return to office mandate that's just been set. I'm not going to remember that reaction when I come to the survey in 2 months' time. I want to talk now. For truly listening, like, I hear what you're saying is actually like putting the person first is actually how to properly listen. Otherwise, you're managing listening in this transactionally false way. So you're not hearing what you need to hear. I'm fascinated that you're getting that notion of best practice and able to show what it means when you put the person at the center, how much better the information gets.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We call it the employee view versus the company view. And what's so interesting in the intro, Dan, you talked about the idea that there'll be winners and losers coming out of, this earthquake we've just had. And I think the winners are the ones who come to us and say, I want a new way of listening and understanding. And those who aren't going to be the winners are the ones who say, well, first I've got to do a faster engagement survey, right? Like that's not the evolution Patrick's describing.
Yeah. And one thing I think the irony of this too is it's easier in this case when we think about engagement surveys to move to something that's more people centric, right? The amount of effort in the annual survey and trying to get distributions out to everybody and hierarchy list, and just with the exhaustion that organizations went through, versus really focused on something a little more lightweight, that's more relevant, that's more focused on people. So I think there's just some real advantages. So I want everyone to understand that we're going to talk about this in a moment. Change is hard. Letting something go is hard. However, what we're suggesting to change to is actually relatively easy, small steps at a time. Putting people first is easy. It's easier if families have conversation more often than once a year. It's easier if with a friend or someone you're in a relationship with, when you're feeling something, bring it up. Versus 6 months later, when the person says, I don't know what you're talking about, I don't remember that moment.
I can't remember.
Right?
Yeah.
It's easier to work through personal issues when you do it when it's on your mind. And I think the same thing goes for relationships between people, workers, employees, and organizations.
Yeah, I was just going to, I'm sorry, Ian, just a quick point.
Jump. Yeah, go, Patrick.
Okay. This always happens when the four of us get together. So Melissa, I was thinking is one of the advantages that you have at Medallia is you come from that customer experience and customer listening background. And as we were talking about those sort of moments that matter, think about what we can borrow from that we have seen that works so well on this CX side, which is asking for reviews from a customer like right after a transaction, right? So, and I'm thinking of like even more specifically, even though this might not be Medallia, but if you use something like Airbnb or have a very intimate experience, a moment that mattered to you, an experience, like your ability to write a really insightful review that captures either the good or the bad experience. It's just going to be so heightened when it's right there. We're still holding it in our bodies. You know what I mean? Like it's still there, and then we can share it. But if you asked me to talk about my Airbnb experience 3 months after it happened, or a product that I just purchased, or an airline that I just flew on, I may have a broad sense of it, but I don't have that specific intimate experience of that moment. Sorry to jump in on you, Ian. I hand it to you.
It's a key piece, and just riffing on what Dan was saying, I think the investment ratio gets way better. Like my experience of the engagement world was 90% of the money was spent capturing, processing, and distributing the survey, and 10% was on doing anything about it.
Yes.
And I think through what Melissa's describing and Dan's describing is that spend inverts, where the technology is pervasive and always gathering the information. So all the energy goes into doing stuff. And I think that's what people are looking for. It's like, stop asking me questions, start doing something with it, please.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And when I hear Dan talking about, not only do they forget if you ask them 6 months later, but you miss that opportunity to improve things for that whole 6 months for all the employees experiencing that same problem.
Yes.
And where does that end up? It ends up hitting your customers. So Airbnb is a Medallia customer, by the way. So we
There
do
you go.
get that feedback right after. And that's so important because when you learn something, Airbnb is able to implement it in real time or reach out to that customer in real time. And we can do the same thing for employees. You just changed managers and it's really hard for you. It's really stressful for you. How could we better support you right now?
Exactly.
Right? It's stressful for the whole team.
Yeah.
And you just let that build instead of supporting them and setting a program that could support others with that kind of, change coming in the future, because manager changes are constantly happening. And that's a bigger change, and something more impactful you want to talk about than, when you just get the annual survey and you're deciding this is my one moment to tell, what's happened. You think how much has happened in a week to you at work. It's so hard to try and put that all at once a year.
Such a great example. I think often the people who sit in the rooms redesigning organizations completely miss out on the friction and cost, the human cost of rebuilding a relationship, reorienting a team, re-understanding the workflow and what the work means. I mean, I've had a phase where I was working with a bunch of government organizations. One person that I wasn't in the organizations, I was supporting some work. One person I talked to there, they had 4 different managers in the space of 6 months. So, I kind of got to the end of 6 months and she's like, how's it going? It's like, I don't know if I'm coming or going. And the upshot was that person left. Like the kind of craziness of not having clarity of purpose, direction, constancy of relationship was such that she moved on, and she was a very talented individual. So I think organizations often miss that. And if you're listening once every 6 months, the person you needed to talk to isn't there anymore because they already voted with, their actions that way. So it's that manager change thing is a great example, Melissa.
Yeah.
So let's so we've clearly articulated the case for why this type of change is necessary. And I hope we've done it well for the community, and I think the community probably agrees with all this. So, but where do we start? How do we start to really implement this type of change? And I think from our perspective and the Choose Change model that we've been collectively working on, one of the key elements in the first steps is having the proper mindset. And because change is meant to be hard, change is meant, you must alter something and or you must let something go to bring something new in. And that takes what we believe as far as people attributes across leadership, across managers, and really across everybody within an organization. That takes courage to change. That takes support, right? So when we talk about being connected, that takes the need for connection to help pick you up when you start to fall back to how things were. And we've made it very clear, let's not do that. Let's continue to look forward. That takes being empathetic, right? For understanding different perspectives, having healthy debate, which then of course requires transparency in that type of debate. And then finally, and equally as important as everything I just said, it takes commitment. You have to be committed to this type of change. So I guess I put this question out to everybody. How do we, in many of these things we've talked about, like empathy is a little more of an individual characteristic. Being connected is actually more cultural and organizational control to some degree. And courage is certainly a little more of an individual attribute. So if we believe all these attributes are necessary, how do we help organizations achieve this and get to this level of change mindset, ultimately to implement and sustain real long-term cultural change? So where do we start there, and how do we make sure that this type of mindset's in place? Thoughts?
You can go first, Ian. I went first
Okay.
last time.
Thank you. One of the
It's a big question.
It is a big question. One of the things that we see work a lot, it's usually sparked with a particular individual who just sees the need, is to build a conversation around the data. And I'll use a kind of present example from the Great Resignation. There is a large, well, first of all, there was an assumption of the general working public that a pandemic meant nobody was changing jobs. Like, there's a pandemic, we're under a crisis, everybody just stays still, nothing changes. Isn't that the case? And it's not true. It wasn't true in 2001 when the dot-com bust. It wasn't true in 2007 with that recession, which was worse because it was financially driven. It's not true now. And so bringing the data to the organization, saying, like, we think that the people are just going on pause, sitting at home, waiting to come back to the office because they all want what was. Like, that's not our situation. Let me show you who's leaving. Let me show you where they're leaving from. Let me show you what the forecast impact on our business will be. It's not the assumption we have, like, oh, it's just lots of young people catching up on career. There's a piece of that, but there's also a whole lot of people who've done what you guys highlighted at the start: sit at home, reflect on their career, reflect on the work-life integration they want to express in the world, and made choices. We don't respond to those choices, where are we going to be? And it's so there's an awful lot of power in being able to explain the change in the world, and take it from the perspective of data, take it from the perspective of, what you think is happening. Some of it's true, but some of it's not. Because I think that then lets people question and explore, sometimes rage, sometimes deny, all of that.
Yeah.
That kind of friction that pushes against change. But if you are constant and clear in so what do you think it means, then that starts to generate a different conversation. So I see a perspective on the world as through the truth of the data, the answers in the data, as a catalyst that starts to build that shared change mindset. I think an individual needs to own it. And I think that, again, that's where the connection to others and connections to communities like this is really powerful, because you feel that you're not alone. And then from there, you need to spread that mindset in the business. I think for me, data is one of those catalysts.
I'm curious, Ian, when you do see that take shape the way you described it, who is it in the organization? Is it the head of people analytics? Is it the CHRO? Kind of where does that, I mean, it's probably not the same every time, but I'm just kind of curious where at least you've seen that. Who's that person?
Usually it's both. Often the person who's got the notion of, hey, our world has changed and the behavior in our business has changed. That's usually sourced out of the people analytics team by the head of people analytics. Depending on their CHRO. We have the gamut of the traditional CHRO who's sort of legalistic compliance, who will set the people head of people analytics free and say, yeah, go talk to the business. I'm trying to solve this stuff, and set them free. That's a perfectly legitimate way to work. And we also have the chief people officers who are a partner in the conversation. So they'll work with the head of analytics to articulate that strategy up to the business. I mean, what you need is permission to engage with the business. So in our experience, because it's the group we work with, that that person is coming out of the head of analytics. They're not coming out as necessarily the analyst who's doing all the number crunching, though many of them are. They're usually coming out as the business person who can interpret the data. Because it's not just, hey, our resignation rate's gone up. It's like, if our resignation goes up and keeps going up, the lights are going off. And it's the lights are going off piece that you need to be able to hold in the conversation.
Yeah.
And they literally are going off, right? We go to restaurants and stores that have closed early or didn't open that day because there wasn't enough staff.
Again, I'm aligned to that, Melissa. We've in conversations with clients where we will be slowing production, not hitting production targets, unless given what we know now, if this continues without change, we will be just scraping production targets. And there's I'll pause there. There's a secondary dynamic I'm seeing, but I want to let this piece of conversation flow.
Well, I can't wait to get to that, Ian and Melissa. So, from your perspective, let me just kind of rephrase. I think I would love to get your point on this. So, with this change of mindset, I suspect you have clients that show up wanting to work with Medallia, and if you have incredible tech, you have obviously a great organization, but if they're sort of wanting to work with you and they want to actually really just work with you and repeat the past, repeat 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, how do you help move them from a change mindset to get them to consider, let's evolve a bit? Like, let's be courageous, right? Let's be empathetic to maybe what some individuals who want to stay, 3 years ago, we want to move forward. How do you do that? I mean, how do you have a respectful, open conversation to really get organizations to embrace that change mindset?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do think it comes back to courage, right? Like the organizations, some approach us and say, well, we're not going to run a survey for a long time because, there's so much going on, return to work, we're just going to hear the complaints about the office, the worries about the vaccine. But we need to hear that. If we don't hear it in a survey, we're going to hear it in social media. Or we had a great example with a medallion on a flight recently. That's what we call ourselves, medallions. So an employee who works for Medallia was on a flight and wearing a Medallia hat and t-shirt. And the flight attendant came up to him and said, "Do you work for Medallia?" And he said, "I do." And she said, "Well, can you tell our senior management? We are so burned out." And then she went on for 5 minutes to describe the situation in which they're working and her ideas to improve it. And he said, "Don't you have a way to tell them?" And she said, "Well, the engagement survey was pushed off for this year, so I don't have any way." So instead, she said it in front of the entire flight. Right? So I think, why I point out the point of courage is people who move forward in spite of their fear, I think is courage. And like you said, Dan, it's actually easier than doing the engagement survey to just give employees an opportunity to provide their feedback and ideas. Because actually, once we hear it, some of the things we worried about are going to be there, but some of them aren't. And employees often come with great ideas about how to solve for it. They're not expecting to just dump it on senior management and have it solve for them. They want to help solve for it. They want things to be better. They're here for a reason. They want to make a difference.
Yeah. I mean, that's so true. I mean, and especially if we really honor that connection to values, connection to purpose, and that type of relationship that workers and employees have with the organization, then we're going to get the best of individuals. And they are invested. People are invested in their organization. We know this. This is there's people are very passionate about the work they do. They want to brag about the work they do. They want to brag about the organization they work with and the cool things that they might be doing to help the community, the cool things they're doing, the bold, that's more future thinking. So I absolutely love that. I have to ask though, you said you have hats, and I don't know why the Medallia hats haven't arrived at the RADICL offices yet. Because I mean, and it's if you have beanies that have Medallia on it, I mean,
we may.
All right, because I will wear it proudly everywhere I go.
And I might also mention, I know Dan's working on the beanie with the RADICL insignia or logo on it as well. So those are coming for everyone's winter wardrobe.
Visier?
Yes, Ian's
missing
my Visier.
Yeah.
So now,
can I?
I'm drinking out of this.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, it's our 45-minute improv moment. Melissa, I'm curious, so much of the conversation we talked about, actually, let me take a step back. So much of what we understand around the Great Resignation or just this sort of work revolution is that people are moving potentially towards something that gives them more of a sense of purpose, something that gives them a better connection, or it's a place that they feel like they want to work because of a values alignment, et cetera. As you think about like the way you described it, like, you know, organizations need to have the courage to start listening now. Like this is not the time to not be listening. And I would think that that notion too of really understanding how that alignment is either, you know, moving in a negative direction or a positive direction would just be so key with this. I mean, you pick up the Wall Street Journal if you're a CEO and you know that this is like probably one of the most important things. So how much is that factoring into the employee listening strategy? Is that proving to be more important, or how do you position that?
Well, I love that you mentioned the CEO, because what we're finding is it's not just HR. Sometimes HR is saying, this isn't the time to listen. And then we're finding other areas of the organization saying, I need to listen now. I need the employee insights. I need the organic intelligence. I need their input on what's happening for our customers and how to solve problems. We need it for day-to-day problem solving. And because we're remote, I can't just walk by everyone's desk. I need an easy way to collect ideas and feedback. And that's really what a survey is. Start that dialogue, problem solve, move forward. You know, the people analytics team can do, you know, high level analysis and look at trends more broadly for longer term planning. But frontline teams need information day to day.
Yes.
It's almost like engagement and the sort of overemphasis on that as a score that meant you were winning has prevented us from listening to the bad news. But like your story about the airline, Melissa, is perfect. People are going to tell the story, and they're going to tell it either to you and give you the chance to solve it, or they're going to tell it publicly, and then you're in damage control.
Yeah.
So like I think that's a big piece of like, why do you need to choose change, and why is this the last chance? Because all the tooling, all the capacity to have that there, you can't keep it quiet in the way it used to be when the access to media wasn't there. It's now public, that there's so much ability to express, be it Glassdoor, be it whatever else. It's if you're not listening, then somebody else is, and that's puts you at the back foot.
You're right.
Yeah, you know, and go ahead, Melissa.
I was just going to comment about the tools in Visier. Like, there's no need for us to be surprised by most things, because we have so much data about people. Like when we work on customer side, it's so hard to get data about customers. And there are so many people who are not our customers that we have no data about that we want to know. They came in, they didn't buy, and they left. But the employees are a captive audience. We have a wealth of knowledge about them. And it's so much easier to look at that data, understand the trends, predict future behavior, and not be surprised. So it's just hard to understand why we don't look at that more and take the proactive action.
And, on that point, Melissa, if I may, Dan, I think we're going to start seeing that change, and I think this is one of the choose change, a little bit HR's last chance. We've been studying this trajectory for, let's say, 10 years. We have been looking at people analytics practices as they affect business results, and working with a professor over in New York. We have proof that the more data you integrate, the more people consume that data, the more effect you have on profit. And so if I think about it again, the money that's been invested in transactional systems, HRIS, is like, well, we have to do this because this is our work. And invariably they're over budget and under deliver. The flip side, we have analytics technology, which is about the effectiveness of people in the business, where we're seeing, 7.5 month paybacks. We're seeing direct relationship to increases in profit. And that's the kind of, back to the CEO, that's the kind of the HR that the CEO is looking for, like help the people side of my business thrive. So that alongside the SEC regulations, if you're a CHRO and you aren't thinking, how do I build value for my business? And you're just thinking, how do I take cost out of my administration? You're going to be on the wrong side of where leading organizations already are, where what will become the norm inside of the rest of functional organizations, because without it, you just won't be competitive. So I think you make a great point.
Yeah. I hear a skill saw in the background. Is someone doing? It's
Sorry, I got
home and no. this is the world of working from home. There's cats, there's kids, there's skill saws, there's chainsaws.
Okay, home improvements next door, so not under my control. Sorry.
So yeah, I want to kind of bring us to a final topic, but I do want to say one thing. Melissa, you said something that I just found really, I just want to repeat it. You know, there's been cases where you've heard, you know, HR might say, well, it's not time to listen right now. And I would just, I know there's a lot of HR folks in the community and listening today. I would assume that why someone's saying that is because what they're really saying is it's not time to run a big, heavy transactional survey right now because we don't have the resources or the time. It's never not appropriate, or it's never appropriate to say it's not time to listen. If organizations stop listening to their people at any time, you know, they're throwing in the towel. So that's why change is so necessary to if we associate listening to employees with a heavy survey program, to Ian's point, where 90% of the work is actually in the transactional setup and 10% is actually in the action. And we think that's something good to get back to. That has to stop. So we have to move forward, and that's a big part of what Choose Change is about. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate that, because Melissa, when you said that, that kind of hit me hard, just hearing and imagining anybody in HR ever saying it's not the right time to listen.
I think you're right. And the point that it's easier, you know, not doing the traditional is you turn on what I'm going to call an anytime survey or an always on survey. You turn it on once and it's just on. It always runs. The data just comes in, right? It's so much easier. There's not all that administration of constantly standing up and taking down surveys. It runs.
Exactly.
And continues to run. You know, the one I used to run is still running. For years, it's been running for 7 years. And it's part of the culture, and that's how people raise issues, and that's how local teams problem solve.
And with the Visier platform, I know, Ian, I mean, you want refreshed data coming in often. You don't want to just load it up with 12-month-old data. I mean, that's just, you know, that's a whole nother conversation, but it's just insane to think that we still might be considering doing that.
It is. I mean, if we sort of pivot to some of the diversity questions that have been around, you know, I think it's another area where what's different now. You know, lots of people were trained into I report diversity to the EEOC once a year, so I get it all set up, I close it out, like I do an annual measure of where I am with my diversity. What the pandemic has shown, what the commitments to growing diversity have shown, that if you don't understand the dynamic inside your business, if you don't, like, how does movement change? How does movement alter the numbers? Like, we've seen a lot of organizations trying to like simply fix it through hiring. So like if I shove enough diverse people in the door, somehow or other my group will end up diverse. And it doesn't work, because often that group ends up going out the door on the other side. Like, it has all kinds of untold repercussions. So that constant assessment of what are the changes and what are the levers for change. And it switches it from that, you know, we're reporting to we are managing, understanding, interpreting, and changing. And that only comes from that, you know, constant understanding. And we see as a practice, you have to socialize people with the data for a while, so they build understanding and trust. Then they get confidence, and then they get change. To your whole notion, Dan, around like how do we build change? It starts with courage, it starts with understanding, and then it moves into sort of confidence and change. So, you know, not having a regular cadence with data. Our chief people officer, Paul, talks about this a lot. Like, he has a cadence with Visier people data, not just with his executive team, but the entire business. Our diversity metrics are transparent to the entire business at detail. And that's that cadence that holds us all accountable to, you know, aligning to the values, aligning to the changes we want. And that's, you know, again, that's not like once, that is an always on thing. So that, you know, again, that's, for me, it's an expression of how modern HR is working, and the benefits that come with it are really, really massive.
Yeah. And I'm just a quick plug, because you brought up Paul. Paul will be on this show next week, so we can't wait to chat with Paul to hear everything he has to say. So I want to bring us to a kind of a final section. There was something I did want to talk about. We don't have time, but I think we've addressed it to some degree. And to build a little hype, we will be introducing our Choose Change model. But really, a lot of what we've talked about today is grounded in this model of, to change, we need to first be inspired to change. We want to change. Then we need to prepare, right? And that's everything from what's our data strategy to what is our people strategy, our people processes. Do we have the appropriate technologies in place, the integrations in place, and the mindset in place? Then the activation, right? And that's the listening mechanisms, and that's everything we do to really start to make sure we're putting people first. We're listening to their voice, not every 12 months, right? A more ongoing, the right place at the right time. And that leads us to answering with data and with truth. And so this is a model, we've pretty much addressed all this, but we will be releasing this and talking about this more in the coming weeks and months. But the final, we have 5 minutes left. I want to pose a question to you both. And we know what the headlines have been in 2021 because we're living them. It's Great Resignation. It's people not feeling valued. Obviously, labor force, workforce, mass exit, quick quits, vaccine mandates. I mean, you name it. We've been through hell to some degree. It's been really rough for society and for organizations and for people. But if we put our future hats on and our I call it kind of our post pandemic, which I'm hopeful and optimistic. What will our headlines be in 2022? That's the first question. And we talk a lot about work, making sure we're solving for the now. And I'm a big believer in that. We have to, because things are moving so quickly. But I do think we need to pause and we need to start being more thoughtful and intentional and thinking about where things are going as we head into 2022, so we can start to build our organization to be ready for what's to come. So it's a little bit of prediction, it's a little bit of pre-planning, and it's a little bit of an opinion question. So Melissa, I'll go to you. What should we be thinking about as we're looking ahead to 2022?
So I'm going to make my prediction more on what I hope for, because I think it's only going to be in some places, but I hope it would be everywhere. And it's really in the future, instead of talking about HR and marketing and sales and these very disparate functions, instead they're working much closer together to work on experience holistically. If we think about it as the company's experience, not employee experience or customer experience, but together it's the experience you have with that company. So like when you talked about employees not feeling valued, we found in our research before the pandemic that the number one emotion associated with turnover is not feeling valued. So no wonder we're experiencing so much turnover, right? And we find that's true with customers too. When customers don't feel valued, when they feel they're just taken for granted or taken advantage of, they also churn. So it's really about an experience that a company delivers in valuing people and valuing the connections and relationships that they're building. So I hope I see a future where these functions all work together. And when we make decisions, like you said, it's not just a financial decision. We bring in the experience and what that means. How are we valuing people when we make that decision, to make the long-term decision, not the short-term cost decision?
Thanks, Melissa. I really love that. The company experience.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, well, very, very well said. All right, Ian, take us home. What's 2022 going to look like?
So it's a wonderful question and really brutal to sort of navigate. But I think my headline for 2022 is the Chief People Officer joins the CEO and the CFO on the earnings call. And it's to Melissa's perspective that, people are not administered by HR and then ignored by operations and kind of whatever by everybody else. But the equal stake, and probably the bigger stake, in fact, Edelman Research just kind of supported this, but the importance of the stake of people in the business is fully recognized. And so the representation of that is, plays out in all of those different places. So my simple headline is, Chief People Officer joins CEO and CFO on earnings call, because I think that states very, very clearly where people will and need to be in terms of a successful business. So, it's been an aspiration for many years, and probably not in 2022, but we're on our way. We're on our way.
Hey, let's shoot big. I hope so. Pat, you want to take us out?
Well, yeah, in terms of a prediction or just, am I on pause?
A prediction or no, you're there.
Okay,
or just a goodbye.
Oh, well,
It's
hey,
normally me saying that.
That's true. I've just been listening to you guys.
I'm holding it over to the older brother, because since I felt like I was talking a little, I wanted to make sure that.
No, it's all good. Well, I want to thank both of you for being on the show. Thanks for being part of this, this larger community about, that it's trying to help us collectively find a way to adapt and change to this bizarre changing world we're in. But it's also just such a huge challenge to make, work better for people and address those core needs. So thanks to both of you, and thanks for the ongoing collaboration.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks, and thanks community. Thanks Ian. Thanks Melissa. Have a wonderful rest of the day and week.
Goodbye.
Thank you. You too.
See ya. Bye-bye.